My family has been deeply rooted in this land for over a century, a connection forged through generations of hard work and dedication. Long before the Homeowners Association ever imposed its regulations, my ancestors cultivated this property, transforming it into our sanctuary. Nestled among wide-open fields and towering trees, the land is not just a plot, it is a tapestry woven with memories. At the heart of our family legacy stands my grandfather's old barn, a steadfast structure that has witnessed countless seasons of change. Its weathered wooden beams tell stories of summers spent with cousins playing hide and seek, of harvests celebrated together, and of winter nights when we gathered around the fireplace inside, sharing tales under the soft glow of lanterns. The barn wasn't merely a building, it represented our history, our struggles and triumphs, and our unwavering family bond. To those outside our lineage, the barn may have appeared dilapidated, its weather-beaten facade a point of contention for the newly installed HOA. They labeled it an eyesore, blind to the sentimental value it held for my family. They had no understanding of the laughter that echoed within its walls or the generations that had relied on it for shelter, craftsmanship, and community gatherings. The idea that such a cherished structure could be reduced to rubble felt like an affront to our legacy. As news of their plans spread through the community, I felt an unsettling wave wash over me. I may have been away at the time, but the bond I shared with that land was unbroken. The grassroots uproar among my neighbors served as a reminder of how vital it is to uphold what matters most to us, a familial history enshrined in barn stories and moments frozen in time. Each patch of earth surrounding that barn carries whispers of ancestors who tilled fields under the sun. As I reflect on their sacrifices, and my own, there's an unshakable sense of duty to protect this legacy. After all, it's not just about resisting change, it's about defending an inheritance forged in resilience and love. As I prepared for what lay ahead, one thought resonated deeper than any concern: they would not erase our history without a fight. The emergence of the Homeowners Association, HOA, in our community marked a significant shift in the landscape I had known all my life. Initially formed under the guise of preserving neighborhood aesthetics and property values, the HOA began as a seemingly innocuous entity dedicated to maintaining order in our otherwise peaceful surroundings. They claimed they wanted to create a harmonious environment for residents, but their intentions soon proved to be far more insidious. As new residents moved in, many of whom hailed from urban backgrounds, a desire for uniformity took root. The HOA began implementing strict regulations regarding property appearances, landscapes, and even architectural styles. What started with recommendations quickly escalated into harsh demands. No longer were we simply neighbors, we became subjects of scrutiny under an ever-watchful eye. In this atmosphere of control, my grandfather's old barn became an unlikely target. It was not just an abandoned structure, it was a piece of history, a remnant of a time when our land thrived under the care of generations. To the HOA, however, it represented everything they sought to eliminate: character and individuality. Their complaint was focused on aesthetics. They deemed it an eyesore, an affront to their vision of a pristine neighborhood governed by conformity. As information about the HOA's actions spread, I learned that they were not confined to my property. Many homeowners received notices, citing petty grievances designed to undermine personal expression. Complying with the HOA became a necessity for those who feared repercussions or financial penalties. The once close-knit community began to fracture under the weight of rules that seemed arbitrary and draconian. The situation escalated into confrontations at meetings, where residents voiced their frustration over the HOA's overreach. Some resisted quietly, cherishing their home's unique qualities, while others felt entirely powerless to fight back against this newly imposed authority. It was here that my awareness grew. I realized how deeply this organization threatened not only my family's legacy, but also the broader heritage of our community. This realization ignited a determination within me, not just to fight for my grandfather's barn, but to take a stand against what felt like an attack on our way of life. The fight would not stop until the very essence of our community was preserved. As tensions between the HOA and the homeowners rose, my grandfather's barn became the focal point of their complaints and a symbol of their rigid enforcement. Their initial grievance was couched in the language of aesthetics. They deemed the barn an eyesore, claiming it detracted from the neighborhood's carefully curated visual appeal. This designation seemed puzzling to me. The barn was not just a relic of our past, it was a vibrant part of our family's story, rich with character and memories. The complaints began as whispers, vague insinuations made during HOA meetings, but quickly escalated into targeted actions. They sent official letters outlining alleged violations concerning the barn's condition, citing peeling paint and sagging roof beams. To them, these signs of age signified neglect rather than a history worth honoring. The HOA imposed deadlines for repairs that were unreasonable, ignoring the fact that addressing such issues would require resources and time that my family had struggled to maintain. As their pressure mounted, they took things a step further by sending inspectors to assess our property. Those visits felt intrusive and invasive, with HOA members walking the grounds and scrutinizing every detail as if measuring my family's worth against some arbitrary standard of suburban perfection. In conversations with neighbors, I began to hear rumors that their ultimate goal was demolition, a plan to erase what they viewed as an imperfection in their vision of a pristine community. The day I received the news about the demolition marked a turning point. I learned that they had filed an emergency petition, declaring that the barn posed structural hazards that necessitated immediate action. It was a thinly veiled excuse, laden with irony given its deep-rooted significance within our community. Knowing I was away during this critical period seemed to embolden them, as if they believed my absence made me vulnerable. What struck me most painfully was how little regard they showed for my family's attachment to the barn. To them, it was simply a property issue. To me, it was part of our legacy being erased without a second thought. I realized then that this fight went beyond just saving a building. It was about preserving our identity and honoring generations that had poured their lives into that land. As their clock ticked down to demolition, I knew I had to act fast, not just for my family, but for all of us who cherished what made our community unique. While I was away on a trip, completely unaware of the looming crisis, the HOA executed their plan with ruthless efficiency. It was a quiet morning when I received an urgent call from a neighbor, their voice trembling with disbelief. "They've bulldozed your grandfather's barn," they said, each word hitting me like a punch to the gut. I felt frozen in place, grappling with the shock of what I had just heard. The very foundation of my family's legacy had been shattered, and it felt surreal that someone could erase decades of history without so much as a conversation. Rushing back home, my mind was racing through memories of summers spent in that barn, playing games with cousins, learning to work with my hands alongside my grandfather, and listening to his stories echo off those weathered walls. The thought that all of that could be reduced to mere rubble was unbearable. When I arrived at the property, my heart sank further. A cloud of dust hung in the air where the barn had once stood, and the ground bore scars from the heavy machinery that had trampled our family history. It's moments like these that test you. Do you roll over and accept the loss, or do you fight back? Funny enough, I've noticed that every time someone subscribes, justice seems to find its way. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe it's fate. But anyway, back to how I turned the tables on them. The sight was overwhelming. I felt anger surging within me. How could they do this? My chest tightened as I surveyed the debris scattered haphazardly across the land, fragments of wood and pieces of metal somehow transforming into symbols of loss for our family. The bulldozers and workers had departed, leaving behind a silence filled only with my despair. In that moment, it became evident that this was more than just an act against property. It was an assault on our heritage. The HOA had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, showing blatant disregard for our feelings and memories tied to that barn. As I stood there amidst the ruins, grief quickly morphed into resolve. This injustice would not go unanswered. I realized I had to act swiftly, not just for my grandfather's barn, but for everyone who cherished their own homes and histories within our community. The emotions coursing through me, anger, sadness, determination, coalesced into a singular intention: to fight back against the encroaching authority that threatened to erase our collective identity. With renewed purpose, I knew it was time to take charge and expose the unlawful actions of the HOA before they could harm anyone else's legacy. In the aftermath of my grandfather's barn being demolished, I found myself grappling not only with personal loss, but also with a unique advantage that I had previously taken for granted: my connection to the sitting governor. Being the governor's brother came with an intricate network of relationships that opened doors to resources and influence within the state legal frameworks. I understood that my family name carried weight, and I was determined to employ that influence in crafting a response to the HOA's reckless actions. The gravity of my familial ties struck me more profoundly now, as I realized they could be pivotal in challenging the HOA's authority. This wasn't just about me or my grandfather's barn anymore. It was about leveraging every resource at my disposal to fight for our right to preserve our history. I had access to attorneys who specialized in property law, and friendships within various state departments could lend credibility to our cause. My ability to navigate these complex channels meant that we could mount a significant challenge against the HOA rather than facing them as just another powerless homeowner. With resolve ignited by emotion and purpose, I began reaching out to allies in local government. My first step was contacting a former colleague in state property management, someone familiar with cases involving property rights and community regulations. Armed with detailed accounts of what had transpired, the illegal bulldozing, the deceptive practices, I felt empowered to initiate formal inquiries into the HOA's operations. As news spread about my family's situation, people within the community began rallying around us. My identity as the governor's brother transformed from a simple identifier into a clarion call for action. Neighbors who might have once felt intimidated by the HOA now saw a chance to unite against what they viewed as tyranny masquerading as governance. Utilizing my connections not only helped shine a spotlight on our fight, but also emphasized how intertwined our individual stories were with broader issues of autonomy and heritage preservation. The energy surrounding this movement galvanized both residents and local activists. They were inspired by the prospect that we could stand against an authority that had grown too bold and unyielding in its pursuit of conformity. As I delved deeper into strategizing our response, I recognized that this battle would be fought on two fronts: protecting our family legacy while advocating for all who felt their identities threatened by overreach. And with every step taken under this newly ignited purpose, it became clearer. This journey wasn't merely an obligation. It was a commitment to safeguarding a legacy far greater than myself. With a clear sense of urgency fueling my actions, I set in motion a full-scale investigation into the HOA's dealings, determined to expose their illegal activities and protect my family's property. The first step involved gathering as much documentation as possible regarding the demolition of my grandfather's barn. I combed through emails, letters, and any communication related to the HOA's complaints and eventual decision to bulldoze the barn without consent. Each piece of evidence would serve as a vital thread in unraveling their narrative. Next, I reached out to neighbors who had also been affected by the HOA's aggressive tactics. Many were hesitant to speak up, fearing repercussions, but I assured them that unity was our strength. Together, we formed a coalition of residents willing to share their stories and experiences. Their accounts of intimidation and unjust fines painted a troubling picture of a rogue organization unaccountable for its actions. This collective testimony would bolster our case against the HOA. Simultaneously, I leveraged my status as the governor's brother to request an official inquiry into the HOA's practices from relevant state departments. I contacted officials within property management and zoning oversight, presenting them with evidence of potential legal violations. I emphasized that this was not merely a personal grievance, but an issue with broader implications for property rights and community governance. As I navigated these bureaucratic hurdles, I also utilized my connections to consult with legal experts specializing in property law. They helped me understand the nuances of state regulations regarding homeowners associations and property protection laws. Armed with this knowledge, I began drafting potential legal challenges that could be brought against the HOA for their unauthorized actions. Throughout this process, my emotions ranged from righteous anger to hopeful determination. Each small victory, gathering support, collecting evidence, securing legal advice, fueled my resolve to see this through. Time was of the essence. I needed to act swiftly before the HOA could further entrench its power or silence dissenting voices within our community. As I pieced together our strategy to confront the HOA, it became increasingly clear that we were not just fighting for a barn. We were standing up for our identity, our history, and the fundamental right to shape our community according to values that honored tradition and individuality rather than conformity. Momentum was building, and an awakening was taking place, not just within me but across our neighborhood as well. Together, we would demand accountability and reclaim what had been unjustly taken from us. In my pursuit of justice for my grandfather's barn and the community's rights, gathering solid evidence of the HOA's illegal activities became paramount. I embarked on a methodical approach, knowing that each piece of documentation and testimony would build a stronger case against their actions. I began by revisiting the site of the demolition, meticulously documenting everything left in its wake. Photographs of the remains of the barn, along with any nearby signage about HOA regulations, were crucial for establishing a timeline and context for our claims. I also collected copies of the HOA's communications regarding my grandfather's property, letters that outlined their complaints and demands. Each correspondence echoed their attempts to exert authority over our land and demonstrated their disregard for our family's history. Next, I organized meetings with neighbors who had faced similar intimidation from the HOA. Many were reluctant to speak out at first, fearing backlash, but as I shared my own story, a tale of loss intertwined with anger, they began to open up. I encouraged them to recount their experiences, whether they involved unjust fines, threats of demolition, or desperate attempts to comply with arbitrary rules. With each testimony, I recorded details, including names, dates, and specific incidents that highlighted the HOA's pattern of behavior. These accounts painted a disturbing picture of an organization that had overstepped its bounds. In parallel, I delved into property law, researching regulations surrounding homeowners associations and their enforcement capabilities. This knowledge was essential. It would help us identify specific legal violations and reinforce our argument against the HOA's actions. I consulted legal experts who guided me through pertinent laws and precedents that could strengthen our case. As I compiled this evidence, I felt a sense of empowerment building within me. The combination of first-hand accounts from neighbors and documented proof not only fortified my resolve, but also unified the community in a shared mission. Our collective narrative gained momentum, transforming individual grievances into a powerful chorus demanding accountability. It became clear that we were not merely fighting for my grandfather's barn. We were standing up against an organization that had abused its power and threatened our community's identity. Each day brought us closer to unveiling the truth behind the HOA's operations, and with every piece of evidence gathered, I felt more certain that we would reclaim what was rightfully ours. Together, we would confront this injustice head-on. After gathering substantial evidence against the HOA, the moment to present my findings to state authorities arrived, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. With the weight of my family's legacy on my shoulders, I prepared to expose the corruption that had plagued not only my family, but many others in our community. This was no longer a personal battle. It was about standing up for those who had suffered in silence under the HOA's oppressive tactics. I arranged a meeting with key officials in property management and local governance, leveraging my connections as the governor's brother to ensure my voice would be heard. As I walked into the conference room, I could feel a palpable tension in the air, a mix of skepticism and curiosity from those gathered. They were used to hearing complaints, but I was armed with compelling evidence that would demonstrate a systemic pattern of abuse. I began by laying out the chronological timeline of events leading to my grandfather's barn's demolition. Accompanied by photographs, official correspondence from the HOA, and testimonies from affected residents, it painted a stark picture of an organization that had overstepped its bounds. The letters detailing their demands were filled with threats and intimidation tactics aimed at compliance rather than genuine concern for property aesthetics. Next, I introduced testimonies from neighbors who bravely recounted their own experiences, how the HOA had imposed unreasonable fines, conducted invasive inspections, and threatened them with legal action for minor infractions. Their stories resonated deeply within the room, highlighting how widespread these abuses were and how they contributed to an atmosphere of fear within our community. As I spoke passionately about the impact these actions had on our lives, not just financially but emotionally, I could see some officials shifting in their seats, visibly moved by the accounts being shared. It became clear that these were not isolated incidents. They formed part of a growing narrative of community oppression that needed urgent attention. By shedding light on this corruption, I aimed to prompt a broader investigation into the HOA's practices. My goal was not just to hold them accountable for their actions regarding my grandfather's barn, but also to pave the way for reforms that would protect other homeowners from similar fates in the future. The meeting concluded with assurances from officials that they would take our claims seriously and initiate inquiries into the HOA's governance structure. As I left that day, hope surged within me. We were not only exposing wrongdoing, but also igniting a movement toward justice that transcended individual grievances. Together, we were reclaiming our voices and asserting our rights, an essential step toward restoring integrity in our community. The investigation into the HOA's actions unearthed a series of legal violations that had far-reaching consequences. As I presented my findings to state authorities, it became clear that the HOA had not only overstepped its authority, but had also violated specific state property laws designed to protect homeowners. Their decision to demolish my grandfather's barn without consent was a blatant disregard for legal protocols regarding historical preservation and community governance. One of the first violations identified was their failure to provide proper notification before initiating the demolition. State law mandates that homeowners must receive a formal notice detailing any complaints and providing an opportunity for remediation before such drastic actions are taken. The HOA had bypassed this essential step entirely, believing their authority exempted them from adhering to the law. Additionally, the evidence I gathered revealed that the HOA had manipulated zoning regulations in a way that unjustly targeted properties like my grandfather's barn, which held historical significance. This not only misrepresented the intent of zoning laws, but also showcased their blatant abuse of power to enforce conformity at the expense of our community's heritage. The testimonies from affected residents further corroborated this pattern of selective enforcement, highlighting how others had faced similar intimidation tactics. As these legal ramifications came to light, it prompted a cascade of repercussions for the HOA. The state authorities launched a formal investigation into their practices, scrutinizing their governance and decision-making processes. The potential for fines and penalties loomed large over the organization, as officials began to acknowledge the detrimental impact of their actions on community members. Moreover, discussions about amending state laws regarding HOA governance gained traction in legislative circles. Lawmakers recognized the urgent need to establish clearer guidelines and accountability mechanisms for homeowners associations to prevent future abuses. This was a pivotal moment. Not only could we hold the HOA accountable for its past transgressions, but we could also influence future policies aimed at protecting other homeowners from similar fates. As I continued to work alongside state officials and legal experts, it became evident that our fight was yielding tangible results. The momentum built around exposing these illegal activities shifted public sentiment against the HOA, emboldening others in the community to speak out against injustices they had long endured in silence. With each step forward, we were dismantling not just the oppressive practices of the HOA, but also paving the way for a more equitable framework for property rights within our community. Our commitment to justice was transforming into a movement that would ensure our voices were heard and respected in future governance. As the dust settled from the confrontation with the HOA, a new chapter began, one focused on rebuilding my grandfather's barn. The lumber had been ordered, and local craftsmen, some of whom had fond memories associated with the original structure, rallied to help. Their shared commitment to the project was deeply moving, transforming a painful memory into a tangible display of community support and resilience. Every day at the construction site was filled with emotions ranging from nostalgia to hope. I stood among friends and neighbors as we carefully selected each piece of wood, reminiscing about what the barn had meant to our family and the stories it held. It became a labor of love, each nail hammered reinvigorating that connection to the past. With every plank raised, I felt a sense of triumph washing over me, proof that despite adversity, we could rebuild not just a structure, but a symbol of our unity and pride. The design was faithful to my grandfather's vision, but infused with modern touches that echoed the significance of its legacy. We made sure to honor its history while ensuring it would last for generations to come. As the crew worked diligently to reconstruct the barn, I often found myself recalling my childhood memories, the laughter of family gatherings, the sweet scent of hay during harvest season, and my grandfather's stories echoing inside those very walls. The smell of fresh-cut wood mixed with the autumn air was a reminder that life goes on, and so does tradition. One crisp morning, we reached a pivotal moment, the raising of the barn's roof. The entire community gathered for this event, recognizing how important this moment was for all of us. As we hoisted the final beam into place, cheers erupted from everyone present. I felt overwhelmed by gratitude, not just for those who had helped restore the barn, but also for their unwavering belief in what it represented: resilience, heritage, and the strength of community. In that moment, as sunlight filtered through the newly framed windows and shone onto the ground below, I realized that we were not just rebuilding a barn. We were reinforcing our identity as a family and as part of a larger community. This renewed structure would serve as a reminder that no matter the challenges we face, whether from an HOA or any other obstacle, When we stand together in solidarity, our shared history and values can withstand anything. The barn had been restored, so too had our spirit and unity. With the evidence gathered and the community's resolve solidified, the pressure on state authorities to address the HOA's corrupt practices intensified. The investigation prompted a detailed reevaluation of the HOA's governing structure, revealing systemic issues that had allowed such abuses to flourish unchecked. As residents came forward with their testimonies, it became clear that the HOA's actions were not merely isolated incidents, but indicative of a broader problem within homeowners associations statewide. State officials recognized that the HOA had been operating without sufficient oversight, often prioritizing conformity over the rights and identities of homeowners. The collective damning evidence presented by our community played a pivotal role in initiating a cascade of legal repercussions. Authorities began to scrutinize not just the HOA's decision-making processes, but also its foundational bylaws, which had been manipulated to serve the interests of a select few rather than the community as a whole. Amid this scrutiny, legislation was swiftly put on the agenda to address these shortcomings. Lawmakers began drafting new guidelines aimed at enhancing transparency, accountability, and homeowner rights within associations. Key provisions included stricter requirements for notifications regarding property modifications, mandatory mediation processes before any drastic measures could be taken, and enhanced penalties for violations of state property laws. The dismantling of the HOA was not simply a legal victory, it became a symbol of triumph over oppression. As the association's governing board was disbanded and dissolved, it heralded a new era for our community, one where voices could no longer be silenced by tyranny disguised as governance. Residents were empowered to form a more democratic framework for community management, one that truly represented the values and heritage we had fought so hard to protect. This transition marked a significant turning point, not just in the fight against my grandfather's barn demolition, but in ensuring that future generations would inherit a community built on respect, collaboration, and shared identity. The process encouraged other neighborhoods facing similar struggles to take action against unfair practices within their own HOAs. As I reflected on our journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride in what we had achieved together. The dismantling of the HOA was a hard-earned victory that demonstrated the power of unity in confronting injustice. It reinforced the belief that when communities stand together, they can reclaim their rights and reshape their futures, ensuring that history is honored and preserved for years to come. As I stood beneath the newly rebuilt barn, the sense of justice washed over me like a warm embrace. This was not just a victory for my family, but for every resident who had been affected by the oppressive tactics of the HOA. The journey we undertook highlighted a profound truth: protecting personal heritage is intricately linked to advocating for broader community rights. The fight to reclaim my grandfather's barn had unveiled systemic issues that plagued not only our neighborhood but many others across the state. Reflecting on how far we had come, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Our battle had sparked significant reforms that would benefit countless homeowners in the future. The dismantling of the HOA represented more than the end of their reign. It signified a collective awakening. Community members realized that they wielded power when united, and that standing up for individual rights could lead to systemic change. New laws were established from our struggle, emphasizing transparency and accountability within homeowners associations. With stricter regulations in place, future generations would no longer have to endure the same injustices we faced. These reforms were vital, ensuring that every voice mattered and that no one could be silenced by fear or aggression. Moreover, this experience fostered a renewed sense of identity within our community. Residents began to take pride in their shared values and history, celebrating their unique contributions rather than conforming to arbitrary standards set by an overreaching organization. Our barn became a symbol of resilience, not just as a structure, but as an emblem of what can be achieved when individuals rise together to defend their heritage against encroachment. Justice served here meant that families could again gather without fear, creating memories under the same roof where laughter once echoed. The barn stood tall, representing our victory not only over the HOA, but also over a culture of silence and compliance. Looking forward, I saw an opportunity for growth and unity, a chance to build a community where values of fairness, respect, and individuality thrived. This moment resonated as a reminder that defending one's heritage often leads to greater awareness and reform, paving the way for a brighter future where history is cherished, voices are amplified, and justice prevails. Together, we had fought back against oppression and emerged stronger, ensuring that our legacy would endure long beyond the walls of this barn.